Sam Killerman is a multidisciplinary artist who puts his gifts to work to achieve global justice. Sam is the person behind It's Pronounced Metrosexual, and he is also the author of A Guide to Gender, an exploration of gender from a social justice perspective with humor and comics to boot. The book opened as #1 bestseller in gender on Amazon, and as a reflection of Sam's commitment to access gender as a social core value, he's given away over 10,000 copies. He's also given a well-received TED Talk called Understanding the Complexities of Gender. Sam joins me now to discuss gender as it relates to the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Cool. So, yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation because, it's something that I've been, like the concept of divine masculine and divine feminine in the spirituality groups that I've found myself being actively part of. It's such a conversation that I feel so many people about, where does queer sexuality fit into the narrative of divine masculine and divine feminine, and as it pertains to your work, I feel like you're such a perfect person to talk about when it comes to cisgendered bias and privilege, and how these narratives of queer sexuality can just get kind of paved over with hetero-normative narratives. So yeah, let's dive into it.
Yeah, let's see.
So, well, first I'm kind of curious, how did you find yourself getting into this kind of work with just with sexuality, with coming into this awareness that there's a differentiation, or that there's a difference between sexual orientation and gender identity and the like.
I get asked that question a lot, and there's so many different little things, and the more I think about it over the years, the more I can kind of trace back to where my interest or my passion comes from. The most direct answer, the most direct thing that pops into my mind is this thing that always happens to me, which is that people always assume that I'm gay, and I'm not. And it leads to these odd situations, and I find them to be humorous. I used to find them to be very uncomfortable and scary, and I didn't want to tell anybody about them. And the thing that helped me go from that initial place of fear when that was happening to the place where I'm at now of humorous comfort was a series of conversations with people who were wiser than me about gender and sexuality. People who were patient, who were safe, and who let me ask questions that I didn't feel like I was allowed to ask anybody else. Why is this happening? Why is this happening to me specifically? What do you mean gender and sexuality? These are all things that I was just, like all of us, were not really to ask about or question. Mm-hmm. And for me, being straight and cis, I was never put in a position up until then where I had to question those things. Because you already hit on this, but it's pretty easy when everything is built for you to not realize everything's built for you, Mm-hmm. And in that case, being a feminine guy, which is ultimately what it came down to, I do identify as a man, but I'm pretty, to be pretty. I'm very feminine, and that is something that really throws people off. And as I've gotten older, I've become more comfortable with expressing my femininity, and the more I become comfortable with that aspect of myself, the more of these types of situations I end up in. So it's become kind of this beast that feeds itself in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And after about 50 or 60 conversations when I was younger, to that place of actually having what's going on, to understanding it better, to being able to help other people understand it better.
Oh, well, that sounds like a kind of a long journey that you've taken to just be where you're at today. And I want to touch on what you just said about being in spaces where you're allowed to ask, mm-hmm. and where you're allowed to not know, and grow as an ally and grow in your understanding. Because you, like you said, as a cisgendered heterosexually identified man, like, and I think I got that right. You're right. Like, everything's just kind of built for you. You don't really have to question your privilege. You don't have to question where you're coming from in a world that's just kind of built for that, like, that disposition of your gender identity, your sexuality. You just don't have to question it, but, like, you did, and in that you
starts to make sense.
Like, be an active.
With all these omens, we've been calling it.
So with that, I kind of want to jump into, like, what is
it all starts to make sense.
What are the privileges that come along with that?
Okay. Do you just in general?
What is a cisgendered identity?
With his Western medicine and
Wait.
Yes.
Okay. All this of online or like that. Cisgender identity, identifying is the gender that corresponds to the sex you were assigned at birth. That's the simple definition that we often get, but even that's we say that like it's a simple thing to understand, but it's really not, right? Like, what do you mean by identifying with a gender, and what do you mean by sex confirmed? And it's those little questions of, like, what do you mean by identifying with a gender? You get more questions. What do you mean by gender? And all of that is what I'm trying to answer for myself and help other people understand. So, hold on a little bit more. The way I think about it, you're essentially just a way of classifying personality. And when we live in society like the one that I was brought in, we have essentially, we're given two options for gender. And we're also given two options for sex. Sex is the physical option that you are born with, or one that you got through puberty. And we make an assignment at birth if you're either going to be male, and we assume that when you grow up, your personality will align with what we expect of a man or a woman. And we assume even more that you're assigned a male identity at birth, you'll grow up and act like that men act like. And that's where cisgender is just an alignment of that identity and that sex comes in. The other way of thinking about it that I think helps people, especially people, is it's a for transgender. Instead of describing transgender people and then what some people will say like normal people, thus stigmatizing trans folks or genderqueer folks or gender non-conforming folks, cisgender is a way to take away that like normal label and just describe a different way of experiencing gender. Yeah, one doesn't take the other. The ways you express gender doesn't necessarily just know your gender identity. You can be very feminine and still identify as a man, or you can be feminine and still identify as queer or non-conforming. And neither does they necessarily say anything about sexuality. You're active, you relate to
people are going hungry and going for companies that got the carpet full of groceries. It's disgusting how you can do nothing and complain about the situation in which you're living, and it all starts to make sense.
Perception of myself with being severe.
The vultures are culture and they're picking on all my friends. It all starts to make sense.
I come off as a very
indigenous and present men. Well, I dedicate my life to the people who need the light, help them rise above the state of the land and their lives, and I'm caught knocking down for the lies by the slide. Independent of this democracy is ready worth to buy. My request is reasonable, it's sharp, undefeatable, ambitious, deep moving towards solutions that are feasible. It's unbelievable. All the slow moving people, they can care less just as long as they are comfortable. Man, it's unforgivable because the conditions now are critical. Whether or not you're ready, we are now approaching the pinnacle. It's difficult to say exactly what to do, but
Yeah,
the change begins
so
with
a
me.
couple
I
things
was
just pop
left
to
to back
mind.
to you
One,
and
a
you
lot of
and you
people
and you
find
and
adding like
you
the
shoes.
ED
Come on,
to
man, make
transgender, to
move, make
cisgender,
move. It all
transgendered,
starts to make
it's just turning it
sense.
into the verb. A lot of people find that to
It
be
all
kind
starts
of
to make
having because
sense.
it's essentially giving this
With all
idea that
these
something happened,
omens and
right? Like you
moon
became
phase
transgender or
grin
someone transgender.
on.
And
It
so that's just like
all
one of those really
starts to make
common things that you hear a lot
sense.
about gender or the transgender,
Well, I
but
dedicate my life to the people who need the
typically,
light, help them rise
I
above
would
the
say that
scam
it's
and the
just
land
those
and their
people
lives,
kind
and
of
I'm
be
cutting like a knife all the lies by the slice.
misunderstanding
Independent of this
because most folks who
democracy
identify
is really
trans
worth
or
the
identify
fight.
as
My
cis,
request is reasonable
whether
for the
they
tribe,
know to identify
undefeatable,
as cis or not, would
ambitious, deep,
probably say
moving
that they've
towards
had
the
the
new
same gender,
that's
the
feasible,
same
it's
gender identity their
unbelievable.
entire
All
life.
slow moving
Um,
people, naked,
and,
care
and
less,
then to hit
just as
what
long as
the
they get
other point that you
comfortable.
were
Man, it's
saying, so
unforgivable
transgender
because the
as
goodness is
a umbrella
never
term versus as
critical.
an
Whether or not
identity,
you're
that's
ready to
such a
be
tough
an
one.
apple,
Like
but
a lot
dependable,
of
it's
people will
difficult
think
to
of
say exactly
transgender
what
as
to
an
do, but the
identity
change
that
begins
is
with me, and I was left to back
self-identify
to
as
you and
transgender.
you
Some
and
people
you
identify
and
as
you and you
transgender
and you.
or
Use your
trans
ability
man,
to change.
transgender and trans
It
woman. And some
all
people think of
starts
transgender
to
as
make
a term for
sense.
all, as you said, non-normative or gender
It
non-conforming
all
or
starts to make
gender queer
sense.
identity labels. And there's dozens and dozens of those.
All starts to
And the
make
thing that I find to be like the most overwhelming, but also like challenging in a good way, thing about all culture and sexuality stuff is how much attention there about literally everything you just said. Like you can't find 100 people out of 100 people to agree on anything. So for me, the thing that I always fall to is just listening to somebody describe their lived experience, whatever that is. If someone says they identify as transgendered with an ED, then that's how they identify, and I'm going to respect that. And if someone says they identify as transgender as an umbrella term, and instead of genderqueer or gender nonconforming, that's cool. I'm going to affirm that and respect that as well.
Yeah, and I think that brings up like a really great point. And I was looking through some of your work that you're doing on your website, and I really love those infographics. Like they're so awesome. They're such good reference points. But just like being an ally, like what does that necessarily mean? Of just like, just because I want to call somebody he, even though they may identify as she, and like it's not my place to like feel justified in calling that person a he just because it's like not convenient to change the way that I'm thinking about gender and changing the way that I'm thinking about biological sex and conflating the two. And so just like with allyship, it's like really paying attention to that and asking those critical questions, just so that you don't place your privilege and kind of try to box frame people into the cultural notion of like what gender identity or what sexual orientation or gender expression has to necessarily, like it doesn't necessarily have to correspond or be or like I think you say like interconnected with like your biological sex. It doesn't have to be dependent on your biological sex. And I think being an ally in that respect is like being aware of like that privilege and speaking and just like being humble and like engaging people in questions.
Yeah, and all of that is it's very difficult because there's no roadmap, there's no guide, and there is no absolute right way to do it, right? Your point of being humble, I think, is a huge one. I think one of the things that I wish someone had told me and something that I learned to be good at, that I never would have thought I'd be so good at, is just failing well and failing gracefully. And that's a big part of allyship, is just being willing to recognize you fail. And as an ally, your job is to be part of an alliance, right? Like that's where the word comes from. And you can't do that without people to whom you're allied. And it's up to them whether or not you're doing a good job as their ally. And I don't think I'm an ally to all trans people. I would never say that. I'm not an ally to all the people. I'm an ally to specific people in my life. And if I'm serving them well, and if I'm doing a good job of like boosting them up when they need to be boosted up, or just providing them support, or just providing them a voice when I can, then that's my metric, I guess, for success. And I think we're all kind of kidding ourselves if we think that we're going to make everybody happy all the time, including ourselves, because it's understanding our own genders and sexualities is very, very difficult, and most people never get the option, or not the option, never get the opportunity to do that, right? And that's enough. But trying to understand somebody else's gender or somebody else's sexuality is impossible. You can almost understand it really well, and that's a pretty ambitious goal by itself.
Yeah, and there's no roadmap, like you said. Like, there's really no roadmap. I mean, but I think the infographics that you've, so diligently have put out to the public, and I think you've uncopyrighted most of them.
Yeah, I uncopyrighted everything I've made, yeah.
Which is amazing, because then it doesn't have to get into sticky legal territory, and it can be like an educational tool for teachers in classrooms. But to come back to the point of, like, there is no roadmap, and, like, I kind of have this, like, running joke with myself of, like, did I miss the, like, 101 consent and queer manual? Like, did I miss that manual? Like, when did that get handed out?
Yeah.
Because, like, it is one of those things where, like, even if, I mean, like, for me, I'm in the community, like, I identify with the LGBTQI plus community, but, to bring it into a bigger picture, like, I still grew up in a culture of patriarchy, and in that system, I have not necessarily been put in a position, like you said yourself, to question my privilege, or to question, like, even the privilege of my gender expression, which is more masculine, so it kind of has this whole, like, slew of contextual things that I have to understand in relation to, like, what that means historically. But there's no roadmap, because, that's kind of how power dynamics function, is, like, there's this invisibility. It functions through, like, an invisible force of not realizing that it's a position of power. And I think a good example of that, which is a little bit of a digression, but is, like, white people not realizing they're white, and what that means socially.
Yeah. How quickly a white person will default to their ethnic identity or heritage of Russian and deflect their white identity in a white supremacist society. It's not really a digression at all. I see that as a very important example for a lot of people to understand.
Yeah, and I think it can hinge on the point of what you said earlier too, in your statement of being an ally and being an active ally, not only just to LGBTQI plus communities, but to people of color, women of color particularly, is, like, the ability to, like, have that awareness of your privilege, and, like, especially as a white person, for me, like, or anybody who's Caucasian or comes off as Caucasian, is to just recognize your power, the power of your voice in a social situation, of who's being heard, and what kind of social stigmas do you not have to deal with. And, like, being an ally is the ability to, like, really recognize that and step back and allow equal opportunity for people's voices, and kind of just observe these social stigmas that might prevent you from wanting to hear this person out,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so to bring it into the context of, the divine masculine and divine feminine narrative that I find so prevalent in New Age spirituality communities, I sent you a link to this podcast, and I'm not sure if you got a chance to listen to it. It was kind of a long one, but and I'll link it below this if I get to post this online. But it was just, like, I was so triggered by this, like, podcast that I was listening to, because not only has it been something that I've really been questioning myself, of, like, this concept of divine sexuality, or this divine union only being expressed to this divine masculine and divine feminine dance in, like, sexual attraction. But, like, it made me realize how important this conversation is to the spiritual communities, is, like, where exists this whole concept of cisgender identity privilege being used to perpetuate these like systems of oppression for non-normative sexualities that don't fit into a wider, again, bring it back to that wider picture of like dynamics that are inherent to patriarchal power.
Yeah. I listened to the first through 22 minutes, and that was you. I read your email, and one of the comments you made was like, I tried to get out of my sense of being triggered just to like listen through it. And I was like, okay, so I was prepared for that. Like I was prepared to be triggered, and because I'm a sexuality educator, I'm in like a lot of places where I'm hearing conversations of sexuality that are very, very complicit in, or even like supportive of oppressive aspects of society. So I was ready, right? And I got to 22 minutes, and I was like, okay, I'm done.
I can't listen to this anymore. And it's funny because I love the person that was conducting the podcast. I absolutely love his work. I think it's amazing work. But this one was just like super triggering, and I was just like face palm. And it just like made me realize how important this kind of conversation is in New Age spirituality communities, to kind of bridge that allyship of recognizing your privilege and not like pasting it over, generalizing it.
Yeah.
And fitting every single sexual dynamic narrative into this like privilege bubble of like boy girl or divine masculine, divine feminine, whether that's embodied in somebody who has male genitalia or female genitalia, or which brings up like, what about intersex genitalia, and it goes back to this notion of what you're saying. It's like your gender expression is very different from your biological sex, and your gender identity is different from your biological sex, and your sexual orientation is different from your biological sex. And it is playing off this notion that like the divine masculine is inherently in like should be
a male body,
yeah, or where like and vice versa with the female body. And I know you didn't get through too much of the podcast, but like there was like a recognition of like the female like a female person embodying some masculine traits, but it not being so like sexy to her like male counterpart who's also like super masculine, even if he is in touch with his like feminine. And I'm just like, but where is this like acknowledgement of like the divine other or the divine neither? Where is this recognition of like the fluidity of like divinity, really? I mean, so I guess like I'm just this is like a question that I mean it's not something that's like fully developed. I don't really see many people talking about it.
Yeah.
But I would love to kind of hear what your perspective is, one in general, just like on the New Age spiritual community, and perhaps like maybe where this like introduction and entertaining the idea that there is a divine both or a divine neither, or where that might come into play and benefit a community.
Yeah, but there's so many things when I like that podcast. The part that I got through was where the guest, I think, was talking about the origins of sexuality and our human ability to reproduce, and I got about through that, I think, and there were a couple comments where I realized there's no point in me really listening to the rest of this podcast, because the operating assumptions upon which everything else is built in the next 50 minutes are dodgy, and I think that's something that that was like, at that point I realized, okay, we can talk about this, like when Akisa comes on, we can talk about this at least, because I think for me, one of the big things that I had to realize myself, and one of the things I try to help other people realize, is how many times we go into situations without questioning our operating assumptions upon which everything else is going to build in that conversation, in that moment, in that like, career, in that whatever. And the big one that I just really frustrated with in that conversation was this assumption that our monkey mind, we're primates that have this primary purpose of reproduction, and that divine masculinity means having sex with multiple partners, being driven to reproduce ultimately and spread our seed, and divine femininity is caring for your offspring and like providing. And it's like, man, there's so much with that, and it's obviously not inclusive of queer sexualities, but beyond that, it's just not even inclusive of a lot of anthropological data or just other theories of like where we actually come from. So-called sex that puts forth a very directly contradictory idea to that. I think is pretty solid, and other theories beyond this whole like spread our seed theory. And what we don't realize is how much that idea, like how much everything we see in our life can confirm that confirmation bias, can confirm that bias without us even realizing it, that we're completely ignoring just a huge swath of people. So for me, the big thing is like with gender, the first thing is to recognize that gender is a social construction, it's not a biological imperative. And that conversation was, I think, affirming this idea that gender is something biological that's baked into our bodies at birth, and then we express what our bodies are, which is the opposite of my assumption for gender now based on my unlearning, and that is that gender is something that is baked into us throughout our lives and expressed based on what we've been taught by our families, what we've been taught by our societies, what we've been taught by our histories in a lot of ways. So in that way, like, I couldn't get through the rest of the latter 50 minutes because I knew that if we're starting this conversation with the assumption that men have to spread their seed and women have to find one partner and settle down, like this isn't going to go anywhere helpful. So that was my first big drive. And beyond that, you talk about the other aspects of gender, instead of just like the divine feminine, or the divine other, or the divine other. I like that. For me, the tough part with that, this is one of the big criticisms to my models for gender, is that they are still binary, right? Like I describe like the nest of masculinity and the nest of femininity, but I'm still saying that we're either feminine or masculine. The reason why I do that is because in our society, like in the society that I was brought up in, everything is either masculine or feminine. There is literally nothing that doesn't have some tinge of gendered implication baked into it. And like the best example, it's like the most ridiculous example I can think of. This time I was in Boston, this was like a couple months ago, I was eating a donut, and this person, I was in a train station in Boston, and this stranger sat at my table, which is already weird, and goes, donut, and goes, why are you eating a pink donut? That's a baby girl donut. What are you gay? They said all those things before I had to say anything. I was like, oh my gosh, like donuts are gender now. Like in our society, donuts, nothing is safe. Like so for me, it's tough to think of like in our society with everything being gendered because we're a binary gendered society. It's tough for me to imagine what would be like the other, what would be the queerness. I instead think that the queerness or the other comes from a mix of what we've been presented as either feminine or masculine, and most of us are a mix of both or a lack of both. So that was a very, very long-winded and I hope kind of like comprehensive response that hopefully wasn't too long. I dig spirituality as a wide brush. I absolutely do.
Yeah. Wait, could you say that last part again? You think spirituality what?
I dig or I appreciate New Age spirituality. Like, just to paint a broad brush, I would say overall I dig it, I appreciate it. It's when we get into this new New Age spirituality as it relates to as it relates to the divine masculine and feminine that I start to trip up a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that these are some just seriously critical conversations. I think if this culture or this movement or counterculture, whatever you want to call it, I think that if it wants to consider itself as a serious, grounded countercultural movement, it has to have these critical discussions such as cultural appropriation and heteronormative narratives, at the foundation of it, because I think that it's quite antithetical to position yourself to be anti-establishment when you're just recreating the establishment in a different way, but still functioning on the same culturally appropriative, colonizing, like heteronormative concepts of reproduction and family, and essentializing these gender notions of like the men must spread their seed and the women must just be passive and just raise the children that they get knocked up with. But it brings up your point really stirred a lot in my mind of especially your critique is like, this is the thing that I've been struggling with the most, is realizing, okay, like I'm looking at the yin and yang symbol, and I see that there is inherently has to be that duality of gender, and the yang still has a little bit of yin in it, so there's that like concept of integration of the other, and then there's like the yin with like a little bit of yang in it, so that's again integration of the other. But those things must be in that harmony, or that like that state of like being able to kind of relate to the other by understanding the other, by being in tune with it within themselves, in the context of this like unity, in this dance, I guess you want to say, like, and it begs the question, it's like, okay, well, maybe that unity does kind of represent the queer aspect of consciousness, because I think that like the yin and yang symbol is really like a symbol of consciousness, of creation. There cannot be unity without the duality, and I totally get that. But you're right, there is just an inherent, like, we can't escape binary gender. We can't escape gender-isms, or like gendering everything. Primarily, my perspective on that is because language has not yet evolved to understand that, and even in our culture of gender expression, like, we only understand how to like gender, like express our gender through masculine and feminine dynamics, just through fashion, through the way that we take up space, and like the position, like what we do in the positions of power that we're given, and how we handle that. But the thing is that, and this is, I think I'm a little bit on a tangent, but like gender identity does have that queerness, does have that non-binary. I don't quite experience myself in relationship to my gender expression, even though my gender expression is like stereotypically masculine, or stereotypically feminine, or maybe just a little bit androgynous, which is another discussion in and of itself, androgyny. But to bring it back to focus is just, it's like everything is kind of through that gendered expression, yet our language hasn't yet evolved to include this this queerness. And I think that because of that limitation, it's like the tendency to kind of just place heteronormative sexual dynamics over this interpretation of a cultural spiritual symbol such as the yin and yang symbol, is like it's definitely like a trap, or it's a reproducing, self-fulfilling prophecy of like not being able to read further into this symbol because our language has not yet evolved, which brings into, you know, question like, what do you think about how your work relates to like expanding this language, this comprehension of language, to introduce it into like more of a common lexicon?
Language is the biggest limiter to, I think it's the limiter to our understandings of ourselves outside of the ways that we've been socialized, really just like our true sense of who would I be if I didn't live in a society that told me that because I looked or I was born this way or I was whatever, I'm supposed to be this other way. Like, who would I be is a question a lot of people ask me. It's like, if you're saying that gender is socially constructed, then who would I be if I was born 100 years ago? And, or who would I be if I was born in a different country? And my response is, you wouldn't be you. You'd be a completely different version of yourself. You have the same, like, just imagining this hypothetical, like you've got all the exact same genealogy, you've got the same brain chemistry, you've got the same hormones, the same body, but born in a different time or born in a different place, you'd be a completely different person. That's where I'm at with my understanding of how we think of ourselves as gender, just as social beings. So that's true. And if it's that gender and sexuality are these fluid things, or they're these things that change over time and place to place, then what's the merit of having these labels? What's the merit of saying we are feminine or we're masculine or we're men or we're women if these boxes are just continuing to expand or continuing to like shape and twist and change over time? And I love that question because my answer is there isn't much, or at least I hope that we can get to the point where we answer that question. We don't need to know things because you don't really say much. Saying that I'm a man means something different. I live in Texas. In Texas, than in New England, than it does in Chile, than it does in Australia. And then if we like travel back in time 50 years or 200 years, and I'm in all those places, it means dramatically different things than it does now, right? So what does it mean to say that I'm a man? Well, it means that in this exact time, in this exact space, I have, or I'm supposed to have these different characters, but I may or may not have. And honestly, me being a man in Texas, I don't have them. I have pretty much any of them. And yet I still identify as a man. So what does that mean? Well, it means we don't have, like you said, language to either understand ourselves or describe ourselves to others. Because right now we're given 2 options, or we're given 50 options. Facebook has expanded their options for gender. A lot of people have. Thanks to a lot of like work of feminism and of the, just honestly, like, the whole queer movement, it's gender and sexuality. We have a lot more options, but we still, they are all still more limiting than they are liberating. And that's because language is, it's just very limiting. And the biggest problem that I keep coming back to is the thing that I mentioned earlier, is that how do we talk about gender, but in the way that we were socialized to understand it? And when we're talking about gender in those ways, aren't implicitly reinforcing that system of gender. So like, if I describe things as feminine, aren't I in some way subtly reinforcing that that thing is feminine? Even if I go through like great lengths to say socialized is feminine, or we were brought up and culture tells us this is feminine, in some small way I'm still saying or reminding somebody that pink is feminine and blue is masculine, even though 80 years ago the flip were true and blue was feminine and pink was masculine. And it's tough. And my thought is that we just, I'm okay with people being frustrated by all different ways that people use terms and by all different ways that we about language, because I think that the more we expand the box or the more we bend the rules, the more we'll get to breaking the box, breaking the rules. And that's where we have gender liberation, or that's where we have sexual liberation, is when we stop much about how to define ourselves and we worry more about just figuring out and explaining who we are in a way that is unique to our experiences, and not necessarily aligned with a category for how we're supposed to have those experiences.
Wow, there's so much packed in that. There's so much that I want to talk, expand upon. But I think the thing that really stuck out to me in the last part of that was just the work of feminism and why that's so critical. And I want to distinguish third wave feminism.
Okay.
Has graduated from like first wave feminism to second wave feminism. Now there's third wave feminism, which would be more of the goal of queering language, is like a technical term that is often like referred to in third wave feminist literature, is like queering language. And the whole point of that is to like just step out of this lens and reinterpret it and like mold it every which way that you can, so that you can finally begin to create isms, if you want to say, like transgenderism, like lesbianism, gay, like what have you. But like, and I think it's important to understand that differentiation of feminism. It's not just man hating. It's not about hating men. I think that's a gross misunderstanding of feminism, or just to to understand that feminism is more about bringing establishment thought processes, or thought processes that are embedded in establishment culture, and like really bring it into a critical lens to again, quote unquote, queer it, so that you can start to break out of these boxes and notions of gender. And and I think that this like ties in really nicely to a point that I wanted to make that can speak a little bit more into some like of the New Age community of like in astrology, like there's like a strong gendered language in astrology, and the tendency to say that Venus is purely feminine and Mars is purely masculine, when there are some feminine qualities to Mars, and there's also some masculine qualities to Mars. But then again, it begs the question of like, what makes these qualities masculine and what makes these qualities feminine? And I can't necessarily answer that right now. I think that's why both you and I are doing the work that we're doing, is to kind of really start to kind of get a handle on that one. But so just to kind of finish on that thought process of like, there's, say, the archetype of Venus, which is, the goddess, the divine feminine, and then there's Mars, this hyper-essentialized, masculine, hyper-essentialized concept of what it is to be masculine. And to that note, there's also Mercury. Mercury is represented by the god Hermes, which is where we get our term hermaphrodite, which I don't know if that's necessarily politically correct anymore. Not at all. So just to note that, anybody who's listening, hermaphrodite is not politically correct.
Yeah.
But
intersex or DSD.
What's that?
Intersex or DSD would be, DSD is an acronym, and for development, and intersex is a term.
Yeah, and that's more appropriate to like current context and current conversation, and it's less stigmatizing and more humanizing versus othering.
Yeah.
But to bring it back, that there's this key element in astrology and to alchemy even, and how astrology plays into alchemy, where you cannot have you cannot bring spirit into something. You cannot like really create medicine or conduct alchemical processes in a lab without having that principle of Mercury, which is representative of like the thing that brings together the other two elements, which are I think salt and sulfur. So that's all to say is that like you need this element in your comprehension of spirituality. Like it's a very key critical factor, I think, in actually attaining this concept of unity and attaining this like concept of healing and like all these things that the New Age community really represents. And espouses to like represent and to want to invite in. But I think that just this critical perspective and this like critical approach to really understanding how like to heal the like divisive gaps of like gendering things and essentializing things, such as sexuality and sexual expression. Even though currently right now it does reflect a gender binary, I think that gender binary is reflected by our limited lexicon. So
yeah, and also just the limited accessibility to that community of non-normative, of folks who have non-normative genders and sexualities, right? Like, one of the big things for me that strikes me in this conversation, the very honest, probably, but flawed idea that a person could espouse of like, you know, I know plenty of men, and they're all very masculine, and they all are all driven to spread their seed, like, and not to recognize this selection bias or this idea that in a community that says men are supposed to be a certain way and that women are supposed to be a certain way, for you to happen to fill that community with men who are that way and women who are that way, that doesn't mean that that's how men are supposed to be or are, or women are supposed to be or women are. It's really that you've created these two roles and you've opened it up to people who probably identify with those two roles, and then they fill that community. And it's funny because it gets back to what you were saying in the very beginning, which is that I don't think many people will recognize that as like that is performing an oppressive aspect of society, but they really are. They're just recreating in this micro level this bigger problematic aspect of society because there's only two ways to be a person. And it's sad because in so many other ways you've used words health, you've used in New Age spirituality, people use words like connection and understanding, and to have a true understanding or true connection or to be really healthy, it's absolutely necessary that we recognize there are more than two ways to be a person. And I've always said, and like this is my allyship that I think is at the core of what I think drives my work, is that if you're doing any sort of work about gender or sexuality, if you're doing it for the other exclusively, that's a problematic place to be working on. If you're trying to save somebody else, or if you're trying to be some source of salvation, you're putting yourself in this position of power and saying, I have the ability to help you. But on the flip side, if you recognize yourself needs salvation, you yourself need saving, you yourself are probably less healthy or less understanding of yourself, or less connected with your sense of self than you could be, and you understand sexuality first from the place of, I have a gender, I have a sexuality, I have race, I have an ethnicity, I have a religion, I have a class, I have all these aspects of my identity, and I need to understand my place in relation to these identities and to other people in society first, before I can even start to try to understand other people.
Mm-hmm. Or offer healing on that level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think many people, especially in self-reflective communities and in like the New Age spirituality community, I don't think many people have been given the opportunity to question their heterosexual privilege or their cisgender privilege. And honestly, I say this with no bullshit. Like it's really sad to me that straight people don't understand straightness, or that cisgender people don't understand cisgenderness. They're never given the opportunity to understand that they are experiencing gender in a unique way, or a sexual unique way. We don't have a straight community. That's one of the weird things about being part of a privileged dominant group, is you see yourself as normal instead of seeing yourself as having that identity. It's just a lack of a marker in your mind.
Yeah, and you know, I think that's like one of the biggest reasons why I really feel super strongly about bringing this awareness into this community, because I really do feel like it can open up a lot of really healing conversations, a lot of self-awareness, and a lot of allyship, and create a safer space because when I was personally listening to that podcast, and again, I'm going to link it below this interview, so people can listen for themselves, is that as well-intentioned and well-meaning as this kind of desire to essentialize sexuality and sexual dynamics as like the way to be, or the best way to be in a partnership or or deal with your sexual energy, is to like do it in a way that's like very heteronormative, and and the thing that bothered me the most was like counseling people as if they have a heteronormative dynamic.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself brings to the surface of what you were just saying, of like needing to question your privilege, needing to question your sexuality, needing to question the power that you hold in a space when there's a space of healing going on, especially if it's counseling, because people are in such a psychologically open place to really listen to that person in power. And if their sexuality doesn't necessarily line up with these concepts of essentialized sexuality, then that person is going to think that there's something wrong with them, even if they do know better, because there's the process of making invisible people's non-normative experience of sexuality. And I'll admit that I don't know what that looks like, just like I don't know what like queer really looks like outside of a patriarchal culture, or the Western culture for that matter. So, but I do know, and I feel really strongly about like what you just said, of just like being aware of your privilege in the context of your sexuality, your race, your upbringing and socioeconomic status, as well as what position of power or what position you're occupying in a space. And with that, I really think that there's like a lot of self-awareness and healing that can like go on because of that. And and I think that would actually make this movement that we're talking, like that I'm talking about personally and personally involved in, actually potent and like longer lived than the 60s, because it was sexual liberation for men. But yeah, we're coming up on an hour here, and I just wanted to see if there's any other points that you wanted to bring up and make, or any closing sentiments that you wanted to end with.
The big one was just that thing that we were just talking about, is just making sure people realize it's not, I think the phrase check your privilege or understanding your privilege, it immediately evokes this sense of shame, or the sense of like, a kid did something wrong, right? And that causes you to retreat, and I don't see it that way, and especially in this case, I see it as a genuine opportunity. And for people who are spending their lives trying to form deep connections and find healing for themselves and others, the opportunity to check the operating assumptions about yourself and the other people in your life, and then be provided with new lenses to see them, is huge. And it is scary, but it's also just so rewarding. And I've never been healthier than like every day after I get the opportunity to like really just rethink something that I didn't even realize was affecting my life on a daily basis. And I got so much. It's one of the things about my job is I get to talk to so many people. I'm always with these opportunities to like really terrifyingly question something that I never even saw before. And now, 10 years later, I'm way healthier, and I have a better understanding of myself than I did, every day, than I did yesterday every day, right? And it's, I don't know, it's just seems like such an opportunity lost in such an otherwise progressive or in touch community to not be in touch with the sense of there are more than two ways to be a person.
Say that one more time. The last part, not be.
There are more than two ways to be a person. Like I hate specializing it down to that, but that's all. Like, if you can agree that there are more than two ways to be a person, that it's totally healthy to be a person in more than two ways, and you've already understood how problematic it is to say divine masculine, divine feminine, expect people to see one of those two things.
Yeah, and what a more simple way to put it than that is that there's just more than two ways to be, and I really love the last point that you brought up of just, it's so critical, I think, to this conversation for me to really recognize I don't want to put people in shame, because I've been shamed before for not knowing, and it hurts and it sucks and it puts me, it's a dynamic I like to call shame, blame, and pain.
Oh, yeah.
People shame me, people blame me, and then I'm in my pain body because I didn't know better. And let's face it, there's no roadmap, so like let's just like garner some compassion for people's learning process.
Yeah, right.
So with saying that, like, I don't want anybody listening to this like thinking that they're wrong or that they're somehow not a good person just because they haven't been exposed to this before. This is just scratching the surface of a much bigger conversation that we're collectively in, and I'm just super thankful that, Sam, that you took the time out of your day to, you know, just hash this conversation out and do it in a way that I think hopefully we can make accessible to people on a larger scale, so that they can be part of the conversation.
That'd be great.
Well, with that, since we're coming up on an hour, I just want to say that I hope that the quality of this turns out slightly. Like, there was some glitches earlier. It seems like my internet kind of became a little nicer to me, but with that said, maybe, you know, in future times, I can reach out and maybe we can have another interview or something like that.
Yeah, let me know.
Cool, sweet. Well, thank you again so much. And if you have any links that you want to share or websites that you want to share, speak it, brother.
I would recommend checking out that book, Sex Dawn. It's a good one for reading, based on that podcast. Like, only response that I'm just offering a different way of understanding where people come from. And I mean, my book is about gender as a modern social construction, guide to gender. You can get it for free or Amazon or whatever, or Noble, all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think you said you can pay with a tweet.
Or
pay what you want.
Pay what you want. Pay $, whatever you want.
Cool. Well, I appreciate, on behalf of many people, I'm sure, that accessibility to your work. And I'll post that below. So.
Okay.
Anyways, well, have a wonderful day, and thank you again so much, Sam, for your time.
Take care. Ciao.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, I dedicate my life to the people who need the light, help them rise above the scam on the land and their lives. And I'm cutting like a knife for the lies by the slice. Independent of this democracy is really worth the fight. My request is reasonable, a tribe undefeatable. Ambitious, deep moving towards solutions that are feasible. It's unbelievable. All the slow moving people, naked care less, just as long as they are comfortable. Man, it's unforgivable, because the conditions now are critical. Whether or not you're ready, we are now approaching the pinnacle. It's difficult to say exactly what to do, but the change begins with me, and I reflect it back to you and you and you and you.